fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCW 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery, and of course I'm Al Warren, Mr. David Martino. Not the baseball player is on the sidelines today.
Not the baseball player?
Not the baseball player.
No.
You were never any good anyway.
No, I wasn't. I couldn't catch.
That's why you're here. If you were good, you would never even given me time of the day, right? It would have been.
Yeah. Well, maybe I could have done this on the side.
Yeah.
With a great baseball career.
Yeah. Well, so much for that.
I know, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so now before we get on with our guest, I thought I'd mention that I was trying that new thing they said to help you sleep better at night. Remember?
Yeah.
You take your mouth closed and
okay, that's right.
It makes you breathe through your nose and stuff. And it didn't work. I almost killed myself. So I'm recommending people do not do this. Okay.
No.
Okay. This is something just from me to you. One piece of advice I give.
That would be a dangerous act on TikTok.
Yeah.
They'd pull down your video, Al.
Yeah. Well, you're the one that gets your videos.
I know.
It's not me.
I'm dangerous.
I'm the nice guy. You're the dangerous of karate, kung fu.
But not baseball.
Not baseball.
No baseball.
You do better at karate.
That's true.
Anyway. So now today we are talking. This is quite a guest here. I'm very interested in talking to him. So let's just get right to it. He's got a new book called Good Night Forever. Mr. Jeffrey Fleishman, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
Yeah, Jeffrey, you have got, wow, I'm amazed at your career. I could have never done this. You're like long-time correspondent, and I see you've been in Rome and Berlin, Cairo, did Iraq, Libya. Holy cow! What's that like doing that? All that traveling and living and doing reporting like that.
It's been fascinating since I was a kid. I always wanted to do two things: tell stories and see the world. And I thought that being a foreign correspondent was the cheapest way to do that. So that's how that came about. But I loved immersing myself in other cultures and trying to understand the politics and the societies of other nations. And so it's been, every time I went somewhere, I learned a lot about not only where I was going, but myself, as any, I guess most travelers would tell you. But no, I loved my time in Rome. I was based mainly in Rome and then Berlin and then Cairo and did the Arab Spring and saw that real momentous history going on in the Arab world in 2011.
Did it ever sort of get a little bit scary at times?
During in the wars, it did. I mean, the Iraq War, the Kosovo War, the Libya uprising and war after Gaddafi fell. I mean, they were you had to really keep your wits about you and be careful where you traveled. And I was in Iraq when the invasion happened. We were in the north, and it was just you just had to keep the right people and fixers around you. You had to get people who knew the lay of the land, where it was safe to go, where it was not safe to go. And then sometimes you'd come around a corner or a bend and just see this horrific thing, and you try to process that and keep moving. It was always like, especially in war zones, where how fast you slow things seem to move, and then how you process them, and then you sit down and you write, and you know that the next day is coming up and you have to do it again, but at the same time you're trying to get your hands around this momentous event that's happening in this country and that's of consequence to the world in a lot of times. So it's dealing with the personal visions of that and then trying to articulate it as best you could. I found it both terrifying and exhilarating and a real challenge.
Yeah, I would think that's quite the life. I don't think I'd have the guts or stamina, but that's me. Wow. So I'd imagine that a lot of that lifestyle, but what you did, has somehow worked its way into your fiction books.
Yeah, my first novel was Promised Virgins, and it was not autobiographical, but I think as a lot of first novels are, it was close to it. It was about a foreign correspondent covering the war in Kosovo, which I did, and the injection into that war of this Osama bin Laden type character. So from that landscape and that terrain, I was able to, and a lot of my own experiences, I was able to draw and create a world that I wanted to in fiction. And so, and then it went on from there. And my second novel, Shadow Man, dealt also with a foreign correspondent who was suffering later in life from Alzheimer's and how he was trying to hold on to one memory he had. And other people were trying to make sure to try to bring back the rest of his memory. And it was that struggle. And then as I moved to Los Angeles, when I came back to the States in 2014, I'd only really known about Los Angeles as far as it comes to crime and noir through, the Bogart movies, the old late night Bogart movies, of the Chandler novels, of the Hammett novels. But I was so intrigued by Hollywood's take on noir and crime at a young age, that when I got here, I thought I sort of want to get away from writing more or close to autobiographical stuff and getting into really trying to absorb Los Angeles and why it was such a prominent place for noir. So that's when the trilogy, of which ends with Goodnight Forever, started.
Now, your main character, I guess, is Detective Sam Carver. You talk to a lot of fiction writers, but you coming from the same world I'm in, kind of the nonfiction, reporting and telling true stories and stuff. How was the conversion? How was it for you to go into fiction and create a totally new character like Sam Carver out of your mind?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was a lot had to do with the landscape and the terrain. I live in downtown Los Angeles, so buttressed with Skid Row on one side and the fascinating wealth and for lack of a better term, glamour of the city on the other, and you're caught in between all this. And I wondered how a detective would navigate so many different disparities and what that would be like. And so I began thinking about what the character would need, what would be his personality traits in dealing with this and how he would handle it. And then from there, I just began writing the first chapter of the first book, which was My Detective, and to try to get into his head. And so it became I think it became a bit of a challenge at the beginning because I think Hemingway once said, the best thing for a novelist to be is to be a journalist so long as he knows when to stop being a journalist, to be the novelist in him. And I think part of me still struggles with that, although it's gotten a lot easier since I've written a number of books now, but to let go of the real self and take part of that real self and the experience that real selves have and embed it into something completely fictional and made up. And so that's what I was really working to do with Carver, because I really wanted him to be a distinct character with some different traits than might be expected.
Well, do you feel being a journalist with deadlines and all of that, do you feel that has made you a more efficient writer and being able to kind of pull in maybe the people that you have met along the way through your experiences?
I think so. I think yeah, I do. I think it's helped me. It's helped me in terms of structure and editing and being a self-editor. Those are the positive things that come with it. The tougher things is that, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, knowing to take off the journalist hat and go into the fiction hat, to seek that other truth in fiction and know that the boundaries are in many ways, much wider. And in drawing in, for example, with the Sam Carver series, the first book, in each of the books, I wanted to have Los Angeles be its own character, and that's when I think the journalist in me came out. So, the first book, My Detective, deals with a killer architect, and so I explored the downtown Los Angeles as it was going through a renaissance in around 2017, 18, and 19. And the second book, Last Dance, deals with Hollywood and Russian intrigue in the film business. And then the third one, Goodnight Forever, deals with the homeless crisis and the rise of alt-right politics. So I tried to. Those are, I think, where my journalism background came into play, because I wanted to set Sam Carver alive not only in the world of the crime he was solving, but to live more broadly and deeply into the real world around him, to think about certain issues.
Is it the same for you as a lot of fiction writers? Are you like Sam Carver? Do you actually hear him in your head, or do you see him, or how do you experience your character, or is it something completely different?
I think I do. Sometimes when I'll be writing, and I'll think, you're writing the character Sam Carver, but innately he's part of you. He's a creation of you. So some of your DNA is definitely in him. So sometimes I will be writing and thinking, is this Sam or is this Jeff? And I don't want to overstate that, because you do have to get into your character, but obviously your own self, and you're the creator of that. But I do think that there is some of Sam, some of me and Sam. I think that's natural. So I know where the separation is, but I like that commingling of both our natures.
Yeah, like you're not waking up in the middle of the night with a shovel in your hand.
Not yet.
In muddy boots.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, because Dave does that all the time.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Wait till there's bodies piling up, No, it's just because I hear all sorts of stuff. Like we talk to a lot of people that write into fiction a lot, and they'll even describe their characters as like their family or friends or children and stuff. So, I get all sorts of stuff like that. I don't know how deep it goes with you. I always think it's harder for a nonfiction person to go that far.
Yeah, I think you do have to separate your nonfiction world and with your make-believe world. And as I said, you can carry some of the stuff over, but you really need to be, and that's a challenge I had early in my novel. You really need to be able to sort of jump off that precipice and go to these other places and look for the truths in the make-believe. And that's a part of fiction I find fascinating.
Well, do your characters surprise you? Have they ever gone off the rails a little bit and maybe took over the plot or changed it?
Yeah, sometimes in my first book, Promised Virgins, there's a character I just wanted to be a character in a set piece, and that was going to be it. He was going to be in and out. And then I was writing him, I thought, no, this guy belongs. He has a lot more to say, and so I made him a much bigger role, much more prominent in the book. And in the Sam Carver series, I tried to make it a specific point to make sure all my non-prominent characters, side characters, so to speak, were very well drawn, had their own distinct personalities, their own distinct look, how they looked at the world, how they moved through the world, to make each of them real. Because I thought if I can create realities in these more minor characters that the reader can really see than when I drop Sam into that environment and then Dylan Cross the killer, then it will become a fully formed world. So those characters for me, even the minor ones, I try to give a really, when they're on the screen or on the page, a really prominent feel.
So you're supporting characters, so to speak. I guess where do you get them from? Are you like kind of hanging out in coffee shops and walking around the streets and listening to people, or where does it come from for you?
Sometimes that. Sometimes it's traits of people I know that I like the magpie, take a little here, take a little there, try to create a character, like the character in Carver's boss, Captain Manuel Ortiz in the series. He's sort of a cop who's been around. He's seen it all. He's a religious man. He doesn't count. He understands the cruelties of the world, so to speak, but he also waits for its moments of grace, and that's where he finds his redemption, because he believes that despite what he sees, there's a goodness out there, although it becomes increasingly harder to find for him. But he navigates that. And Lenny, the bartender, in all three of the Carver books, is where Carver goes to unload, not necessarily to drink, but to just talk to Lenny. Lenny's a guy from Brooklyn who escaped a drug rap and ended up bartending in Los Angeles, where he's been for decades. And he and Lenny talk about all kinds of things, because Lenny's sort of this raconteur and will go anywhere in a conversation, and Carver likes that about him. So those kinds of characters, I find it's like the characters. Remember, Gene Hackman used to always be so well known and so well praised because he could just appear on the scene for 5 or 10 minutes early in his career, but you would remember that scene because it was just the indelibleness he brought to it. And I try to make my smaller characters in the book the same way, so there's a memory attached to them.
Yeah, I think that's great. It makes it a fuller story and all around. I think that's great. It's much more enjoyable for a person to read. Wow. So this is a 3-book series that you've done. This is the last of the 3 books. When you have this in your mind at the beginning, back at book 1, did you sort of know where you were going to begin, where it was going to be in the middle, and where it was going to be in the end? Do you sort of have that all sort of worked out and maybe even outlined, and then you kind of fill it in? Or are you type just starting and you just kind of go as it goes? Yeah, I am not a 3x5 index kind of guy, writer. I just go with. No, what happened with this one? It started with, as I mentioned earlier, about wanting to get into noir, discovering and exploring LA through this. So the book started. I was only going to write one book. Sam Carver, and the first book is called My Detective, and it starts with the killer Dylan Cross, who's an architect who's been grievously wronged previously, and she's seeking revenge on other architects. And so she opens the book with her murder, and it's in the first person. The second chapter is Carver, and he's in the first person. So the first book, My Detective, goes back and forth in the first person, basically a dialogue between these two people who had never met. And I didn't want it to end like sort of a typical crime novel or a noir novel. I wanted to have some ambiguity. So my agent and the agent read it, and then the publisher came back and said, well, would you do another book on this to see how this all ends? So I said, okay, and that's when I did Last Dance, and then they said, well, you come back and do a 3rd book, because we really want to see how it ends now. Because through all 3 books, basically the storyline is when I didn't stop and think about this in depth until just a little while after I finished up with Good Night Forever. But I thought, if I really had to put this in a 1-sentence line, because LA and Hollywood are famous for tell me your story in one line, but it would really be this twisted, delusional love story between these two very damaged people. One's a killer and one's a cop,
and they go through 3 books together in varying degrees, and then in Goodnight Forever, the finality of that title suggests that one of them may not be around much longer. And so that's sort of so when the book started, no, I had no idea that it would be 3 books or that it would end. But midway through the second book, Last Dance, I knew if I did a third book, pretty much how it would end.
You see, and if they ask you to do another one, you can it was all a dream.
Yeah, it was. That's right. I mean, the dream motif is very popular, right? It was all a dream or hallucination. I did mushrooms, and I came in from the desert. And
yeah. See, book 4, The Mushroom Dream.
Right.
See, we got it made. We can keep this going your whole life.
Yeah.
Just keep it going. How long did it take you to put this all together? Like, did each book come at you pretty quickly, or does it take a little longer?
I think each book took about, say, a little more than a year to write, because I did have a day job. So I'd get up really early in the morning, and that's when I did my best fiction writing. And then, My Detective came out in 2019, Last Dance came out in 2020, and Goodnight Forever just came out.
Well, with this trilogy, how did you keep everything organized? Did you use a specific set of tools, or did you just keep notes? How does that work for you?
I kept it. I knew that I had the 2 main characters, so I knew they were going to be propelling the story through the next 2 books. And I knew, like I mentioned earlier, Captain Manuel Ortiz, Lenny, these characters I definitely wanted to carry from one book to the next because they really helped shape Sam, and in a lot of ways he could mirror off of them, so we got a fuller dimension of Sam through them, and vice versa. With Dylan Cross, the killer, she was in a lot of ways the fascinating character to me, especially as I got deeper into the book about what her motivations were. She's 6 foot tall. She's of Croatian descent, so she's imposing and imposing character. And so she was also a genius at hacking computers. So she hacks Sam's computer after her first murder in My Detective, and she wants him to be the investigating detective. And so she knows everything about him as he's trying to unravel who she even is and who the murderer is. So we already have, through her lens, what Sam is like, at least through her vision. And then he begins to flesh himself out more as the books go on.
And what did she do about all the gay porn she found on his computer?
Yeah, well, no, she was more concerned about his bank accounts. She goes into his computer and she says that, it's so laughable. His password is cop1. Like, she can't believe how easy he was to crack. And so she goes in. Sam does this one thing that is characteristic of him. And every murder he does, he's around the Vic, wherever the Vic is lying or whatever. He looks around to make sure no other cops are looking, and he takes a piece from the crime scene that belonged to them, maybe a quarter or a wedding ring or something, because he wants to feel the weight of that while he's trying to solve the case, so that these people are never forgotten. And he has sort of a touchstone to them. So he's a little bit of a thief himself, but not for gain, but just for moral reasons, to make sure he doesn't forget that a body's been lost or a person's been lost.
Now, do you kind of put a subtext or some sort of a theme underneath the entertainment part of each of these books?
Yes, in My Detective, the underlying theme is the change in Los Angeles through its skyline and architecture, and what architecture means not only to a city, but to the people building it. The vision of its city is obviously the vision of its people and what it says at that moment in time. So I get into developers and architects and the greed, but also the art involved in shaping a new city. And in Last Dance, it opens with the murder of a Russian ballerina that Sam finds in the downtown LA loft, and then it goes into Hollywood a famous but very mysterious Hollywood producer was a former KGB agent, and Sam unravels that, and that goes into the world of espionage and other things. It's like he tries to solve that murder. And Dylan Cross in Last Dance only haunts the book. Sam's main case is the one with the Hollywood producer and the dead ballerina, but she haunts it in a way that he can never. She's always present in his mind, and then she makes a slight appearance toward the end, and that sets up Goodnight Forever. Which that motif is as I mentioned, because I live so close to Skid Row and things downtown, and I've been really studying and just exploring the homeless community just right around my neighborhood. The homeless, the subtext of Goodnight Forever is homeless men are being set on fire in Skid Row, and Sam starts investigating it, and he thinks that it is a couple of billionaire developers who own a lot of Skid Row and think it's time for LA to solve its homeless problem so they can put up buildings. So he's tugged that way, and that brings him into the world of the alt-right and other things. While he's also pursuing Dylan Cross and another crime.
So in a way, I'm thinking that Los Angeles itself is really a main character in each one of these books.
Yes, I mean, Los Angeles is, and I made that a point because part of the joy of doing these three novels was to explore my adopted city. So by writing about a place, as you know, you can make it a character. It becomes dear to you. You see what you love about it, its flaws, its maddeningness, it's things that drive you crazy and things that kind of make you look at something and go, wow, nature actually did that. So, and that's what LA is to a lot. And I wanted to not make, I mean, Los Angeles is so stereotyped and so cliched, and I think I wanted to tell my Los Angeles, from Joan Didion to Raymond Carver to Raymond Chandler to everybody, everyone has their take on Los Angeles, and it has to be unique and specific to the writer. You have to see it in its own rhythm and its own detail. And that's what I tried to do with this, that Los Angeles was an accumulation of detail as I saw it, as I put it into prose. And I think that's what made it, for me, a lot of fun to do. And the thing I came away with in my quest to try to understand Los Angeles is that it's not understandable, it's elusive. And it doesn't want to be defined, it doesn't care if it's defined. And that's what made me understand it a little bit better, that you can't put a wrapping around this and dress it up because it'll trick you too many times. And that's the beauty of it, I think.
Yeah, it's so there's so many parts to it.
Right.
And it's really out of control in a sense. It's kind of like there's no driver here. It's just, and all the parts are doing something different, and it's just kind of where you're at.
Exactly, and you go out of one part and into another part, and you go, how did I get here, right?
Yeah, I say that all the time. It's, it's a scary event, but, it's what it is, I tell you. Do you ever look back now that this 3 book is done, do you ever go back to book 1, let's say, or even book 2 and kind of go, I wished I had done this or changed this, or I wouldn't have done it this way now if I was to write it?
I think in some ways I would have done maybe in the first book a little more foreshadowing of what might have come. Each book is a standalone. I mean, each book gets the backstory in it, but for the full read, obviously, you read all 3, but you could pick up Goodnight Forever and read it and not really have missed the other 2 as far as, the plot and narrative of that novel go. But yeah, because I didn't know they were going to be 3 books, I had to spend a lot of time in Last Dance and Goodnight Forever making sure that connective tissue between to my detective was there. So that became a narrative thing that I had to work on.
I would think too, if you're talking Los Angeles and you're making that a major force in the book, there's going to be comedy in it, kind of even if it's dark comedy. especially with the noir. If that's true, how is it that you plan the timing? You know, because it's got to be done just right.
Right. Yeah. I think Manuel, Captain Ortiz can be very comical without meaning to be, which I think is, I think comedy is the hardest thing to write. So you have to be careful about it. And as you said, it's got to be precise and it has to be dropped in the right place, especially if it's not a comedic novel. So Ortiz provides a little bit of that just because he has sort of an off-kilter view of the world. It's jaded, but as I said, he still looks for those moments of grace. But he'll see the humor in things that everyone else will see, but he won't see it. And Lenny, the bartender, is exasperating in his ways and how he wants to get to the bottom of every little detail, and he'll drive Sam crazy while the two are sitting there at the bar at 2:00 in the morning. And so, but you're right, you have to, especially in noir and crime, you have to pace that out. It has to be so organic to the character that you get the humor in it, but you don't go too bright, right? Because then you lose the thread of where you're trying to get the reader to go. But you definitely need those moments of levity, otherwise it becomes too dark.
Yeah. I think the dark humor's needed. I mean, for me, I think it's important. It's also an outlet for stress, and
right.
for other things, other emotions. I think it's a good thing. But if it's done at the wrong time, you become offensive.
Right. Or you throw your plot off, or you throw your narrative off, right? Because you take it in, you change direction and speed.
Yeah. Well, I tend to be the offensive. So much, they don't even think about the plot anymore. They're just after me. That's okay in a way. Speaking of that, these are all fairly recent books. Do you consciously try to be aware of how you word things or how you comment things? Because I always find that I'm doing true crime, of course, but sometimes it can be offensive what people say to each other, and this is in real life, and it's really hard to, soften the blow, so to speak, when people are really bad people and you're writing about them. But when you're writing about the situation, this is not exactly, nice family hour. This is like, burning people and neo-Nazis and all this sort of stuff going on. So do you find that you have to be careful on how the dialogue is between your characters?
Yeah, and I try not to be judgmental, because you don't, like the characters going into the neo-Nazis or the progressive side of something, you want to paint that as a world that's part of the larger world, and you don't want to be, Sam is more curious than he is judgmental. He's more fascinated by how things work than he is at condemning this or that or taking that. Not that he doesn't think about it or have strong feelings, but that's again why I really made it a point. Two things in these books. One is I want LA to be its own character, and two, I wanted my characters to move in the world as people move in. It's not just confined to the crimes they commit or the things that they see or the family know, but they're tied to this larger flood of humanity that is having its own problems on a lot of levels. So if you can, without being polemic, drop that in and have them navigate that as they're navigating their own lives and crimes, I find an extra dimension to the depth of the character.
Yeah. Now, you wrote most of this over pandemic times. Now, that must have been interesting, especially in downtown LA. How was the pandemic for you in the way it affected your writing? And I mean that with, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. The last couple of years, not, just even the way people behave and act toward everyone else and stuff. You just kind of see all this tension. Did that sort of get in or seep into your writing, do you think?
In Goodnight Forever, I was in the midst of writing it and finishing up when we started really tumbled into the pandemic. and the isolation we all immediately felt, and all these things. And I knew the book was not going to come out for at least another year. And it's an interesting question because I wrestled with this, and I didn't want it to be like a COVID novel too much, because people have lived through it, right? We all shared that experience. So to bring it like it was this new thing, or this thing that we didn't navigate, would have turned people off, or they would have said, "Oh, I've already done that." So I went back and in the second rewrite through Goodnight Forever, I just added, because it took place in late 2019, Goodnight Forever. So I just added a touch, early 220, of I think in one scene when Lenny and Sam are at the bar, and Lenny's reading the newspaper, and he said, "Hey, did you hear about this thing coming out of China, this new pandemic?" So a couple of places I referenced it, hoping that the reader gets it. Oh yeah, okay, we know what happened there, but at least it's there in the book, so it's topical enough, and people can think. I remember years ago I was talking to Amos Oz, the famous Israeli novelist, and he told me something that I remember. He says, we as writers bring words and everything to the page, but the story is a lot more about your words as a writer, and you have to rely on the reader's imagination to fill in. And he described the color yellow. He said, you have a version of the color of yellow, and so do I, but the reader might have a different version. So you have to rely on the reader's judgment and insight and imagination to help carry part of your story too. And I think that was good advice.
Yeah, it's definitely perspective is everything.
Right.
Where you grew up and where you're from and how you see things will be completely how you understand a story in your way. It's so different. Well, yeah, but did the stress itself? I guess what I'm getting at is like when you're locked up in your room and sitting there, and if every time you turn on the TV, there's protesters and there's this and that and all this stuff going on. Does your emotional feeling at a time when you're writing a book like this, does it interfere or does it add to it, or how does that work for you?
Well, for me, it was doubly compounded, because at the time when right as the pandemic was getting underway, I became the foreign and national editor of the Los Angeles Times. So I was dealing in real time with COVID, George Floyd, every other major national and international event. At the same time, I was writing, finishing up this book. So yeah, I was tugged in a lot of ways, and I think some of those ways came into the novel. The sense of isolation, the sense of desperation of what's going on in our society, and the sense of what was happening with the Black Lives Matter protests, what was happening in the cities, where were we going as a country. A lot of that is infused in Goodnight Forever, in some of the homeless sections and some of the more topical sections, because I was dealing with that exactly at the time.
So where do you see yourself going next? What's up now?
Well, the Carver series is is a trilogy, the LA trilogy part of it. I'll see where that goes after, what kind of manifestation it will take. I'm mapping out a new novel now that without Sam Carver, and I'll see what happens with that. I don't exactly know where it's going yet, but I'm fooling around with some ideas.
Yeah. Now, do you find yourself? How do people find you? Do you like to interact on social media with readers or fans?
Yeah, I have a Facebook page, and anyone who reaches out to me, I'll gladly have a social media, or swap text conversations with them. So yeah. Yeah.
Well, and are you running a website too now?
No, not now. Just my Facebook page.
Yeah. How do you like the publishing world the way it is now, with all this self-publishing and Amazon and everything going on?
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, all the voices out there that we would have never heard. I don't know how we can even get our hands around all the stuff that's being published, and that we have no idea that's out there. I mean, the enormity of it. I sometimes go on Amazon and will look for a book or something. You can't believe all the stuff that pops up, and then we have, that's just in the book world. Then you get to the whole web world and the TikToks and the Twitters and all these new things coming up about how people are communicating. And I really realize, especially in the times we live in now, generationally, you really, especially in the news business, you really have to be plugged in. I mean, it used to be just Facebook, then Twitter came along, now you have TikTok and these other manifestations, and all the different generations are speaking and collaborating and informing one another in different ways. So you can see how this atomization of how we get our information and what's relevant to us changes by the medium and how it's coming to us. And that will also shape each generation or each racial class or ethnic class, and how we can all go to our own silos now, which is comforting in some respect, but as a democracy, it can be pretty scary.
Yeah, it certainly brings whole new meanings to things, I'll tell you. That's all I can say. Leave it at that. Well, this has been interesting. I'm really glad you came on. It's good talking to a writer that's been around, so to speak, and not in the way I have.
What do you mean by that, Al? Been around. I have a further definition of that, please.
Well, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
You are the man of the loaded ending sentence, I tell you.
That's my reputation, I tell you. Well, it's been a pleasure. Anyway, our guest today has been Jeffrey Fleishman, and newest book is called Good Night Forever. Thank you for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Tired of wasting time trying to decide what to watch on your streaming service? Go to our website and look for the Martino movie reviews.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.